Hello there friends and welcome, we are finally back to guides, now with AVOWED, Obsidian's new RPG, set in the Pillars of Eternity universe. And I want to start with a guide on how your stats work, also the main mechanics, and some general tips for Path of the Damned, the hardest difficulty mode. Starting with stats, which is of course the most important part of character creation. You are kinda locked into only increasing each stat by a maximum of +3. This doesn't really matter because as soon as you actually start the game, so even as early as the prologue area at level 1, you can already respec your stats by paying gold from the character screen, and then dump 10 whole points into one attribute of choice, with more of course as you level up, thus bypassing the annoying maximum 3 points limitation during character creation. Each stat can only be increased to a maximum of 15. However, you will get diminishing returns at certain thresholds. The first 5 points into any stat will provide you with full amounts. For perception, for example, it's plus 3% extra critical hit chance until 5. However, from 5 to 10 you already get diminishing returns, so now it's only a 2% increase in critical hit chance. From 11 to 15, however, is when you barely get any increases, now it's only plus 1% critical hit chance. And it's the same for any other stat, for example Constitution is plus 5% maximum HP until 5, then only 3% until 10. And after that only 2%. What this means is for most stats, it's not really that recommended to go above 10, but we do have some exceptions. The good thing, however, is that bonuses to your attribute points appear to stack on top of each other, just like Pillars of Eternity. For example, for intelligence I have +1 from a ring and a +2 from a certain buff. That's pretty much permanent. Eventually, because you'll be getting bonuses to a lot of stats from gear and buffs, you can kinda spread it out. As I mentioned before, because of the heavy diminishing returns past 10 in a stat, I would definitely not recommend you increase most of them to 15, but there are a few exceptions. One of them being perception, of course, because extra critical hit chance is godly, especially for fast weapon attacks like daggers or wands. It can really increase your damage. Once again, just like stat buffs, bonuses to critical hit chance also stack on top of each other. For example, I can have plus 30% from 15 perception, then a 6% which is base for my wand weapon, and lastly plus 3% from my unique gloves, for almost 40% criticals, even better later with other gear bonuses. Considering critical damage is at the very least an extra 50% damage increase, it can be worth it. Of course, this only matters for characters with physical attacks, melee or ranged. For mages, not really, since your spells unfortunately cannot critical. This is only for wand attacks. Which then leaves us to another very important stat, which is might. Just like in Pillars of Eternity, might is the main way of increasing all of your damage, culminating at plus 25% extra damage at 10 might, or 30% at 15. Frankly, might is good enough that pretty much any character will want at the very least 10 points into it. 15, I don't think it's that necessary, although it can help once you get higher base damage on weapons from bigger tier upgrades or spells of higher tier, which also have higher base damage. After all, 30% of 100 is much better than 30% of just 50. But 10 is honestly good enough. And I know it might be a bit counterintuitive, but intellect is not really that important for spellcasters, or any character even, because, well, even fighters and rangers, their abilities also cost essence, which is MP. The thing with intellect is you get plus 25 maximum essence until 5, which is decent enough, but more than that is rather unnecessary because it's very easy to recover it through multiple ways. In battle you have spells like Parasitic Staff, which actually drain essence on hit. Potions, of course, also extremely overpowered food bonuses, as I'll soon cover. And for spellcasters themselves, you can simply rely on upgraded grimoires, because of their huge ability cost reduction to spells, culminating in as high as -72%, not to mention of course other bonuses you stack on top. So yeah, intelligence is not really that good. The same for resolve. Around 5 is good enough. I would only go to 10 if you're playing a character focused into physical attacks, since stamina is the main resource for both attacking, parrying, and dodging. Spells don't cost any, however. The thing with resolve is, well, even if you spend a lot of stamina attacking, your stamina will quickly regenerate during battle, unlike HP or Essence. So with proper management, you can handle it all. But of course, if you really want to squeeze as many attacks as possible, it helps to have resolve as high as 10. Past than that is rather worthless. It's at most, well, even barely one extra attack. Definitely not a two-handed weapon, only a small weapon even. Stamina is even less important for characters with guns, either the one-handed or two-handed gun variants, because both have a very high reloading time for every single attack, during which your stamina will have regenerated. Later, however, you can reduce this through dexterity, as I'll soon explain. Even then, I wouldn't go past 10 resolve, or 5. Constitution is, just like in Pillars of Eternity, kind of a dump stat, since you don't really need that high increases in health. You have multiple ways of reducing the damage you take. For example, Heavy Armor, which boasts both high damage reduction and also additional flat damage reduction. And by the way, just like I mentioned before about stuff stacking, with 30% damage reduction and the very cheap Arcane Veil spell, well, you already have 80% DR, that is good enough. So I definitely would not go above even around 5. When I say 5 is because 5 is rather easy to get, especially with gear bonuses. Lastly, we have Dexterity, and this one, just like in Pillars of Eternity, can be very good as well because it's the main source of extra attack speed and also action speed, which is basically for spells, also drinking potions, and other actions that aren't attack based. The thing with Dexterity is I'd much rather save it for slower weapons. Good example being two-handed weapons and guns because of the reload time. For example, let's check the difference between attacking with our magical quarterstaff, which is a two-handed weapon. As you can see, it's somewhat slow, although the attacks kinda stagger enemy a bit. Now let's try it out with 10 dexterity for the plus 28% attack speed bonus. As you can see, it does become faster. The same is true for guns and arquebus. For example, let's fire our arquebus now. It is much faster reload. Of course, increasing it to 15 is something I would only do with enough spare points, since I'd much rather have higher critical hit chance. But yeah, with 15 it's even higher reload speed. You just reload it so much faster. It really is a massive difference increase. That was with 15 dexterity, now let's do it with, no dexterity whatsoever. Just look at it, it's so much slower. During battle, of course, it does matter. So to put it simply, the most powerful stats are definitely Might for the extra damage increase for everything, Dexterity for extra attack and action speed, and Perception, of course, for extra critical hit chance. For spellcasters, focusing to Might, and for melee or ranged characters, Perception and Dexterity. At least if you're using two-handed weapons or guns. Fast weapons like Dagger attack fast enough that you don't really need extra Dexterity. I'd rather extra criticals. While I mentioned before, Dexterity also increases casting speed, I just don't think it's that necessary, because honestly, your casting speed is good enough already for most spells, but just for showcasing purposes, this is what casting the same spells would look like with 10 Dexterity. Honestly, it doesn't matter that much for spells. If only because, like I said, you have much better options like Might to increase first. Now later, of course, when you have enough points to spare, you can definitely max both Might and Dexterity for spells, especially as you'll have ways of, let's say, making your spells cost HP, which you can easily recover. Like I said before, food, even spells that do it for you. And other strategies that I'll cover in the main mage guide. But first, be sure to increase might. Now that we know what the best stats are, let's cover the second most important mechanic in the game: gear upgrades and also gear tiers. Just like in Pillars of Eternity, gears have tier going from common to fine, exceptional, superb, and ultimately legendary. Each tier also has 3, let's say, ranks, each increasing the weapon damage or the gear bonuses. Gear can be upgraded one step at a time for each minor rank, or you can just go all out. It's all based on how many resources you have. The most important part about this, however, is that, as some of you might have already noticed, enemies also have their own gear tier. And if you are fighting enemies with gear of a lower tier than what they have, you will take not only highly increased damage if you don't have good enough armor, or deal awful damage to the enemies. Now, it is true that the Day 1 patch actually alleviated this issue somewhat, but as you're about to see, it still makes a big difference when it comes to both the damage you inflict and receive. Let's check these enemies here. They are tier 2, you can see by the number to the left of their HP bar, with some minor ranks as well, 2 minor ranks. Now let's try attacking them with a spell, as it also works for spells based on your grimoire or main weapon tier. So we only have a common wand. That's tier 1, no minor sub-tier. And we only dealt around 41 damage. Which of course is awful. I mean, you barely moved the boss's HP bar here. Now let's do the same, but with a fine wand. So a second tier weapon. Even without any minor sub-tiers, it doesn't matter, because as the patch notes just said, we won't incur in a -4 difference over the enemy's tier. Same spell. And there we go, 117 damage. We dealt almost triple the damage from just keeping our weapon properly upgraded when compared to the enemy. Now, while the same is also true for damage taken, because of how easy it is to increase your damage reduction by enormous amounts by just having heavy armor, and like I said before, the Wizard Arcane Veil spell, which is very cheap, you can kinda still tank a lot of enemy hits. Weapons, on the other hand, because you don't want to be dealing around 1/3 of your damage only, and enemies on Path of the Damned tend to have quite bloated HP scores, it's much better to focus into upgrading weapons. Thankfully, upgrading weapons and gear overall is pretty easy. It all costs a different set of materials, usually, for example, Paradise and Leather, for all the common tier weapons. When you fully upgrade tiers, the materials will change as well into the second tier materials. Thankfully, you can always either break down or craft materials by combining lower tier ones into higher tier, or breaking the better ones into lower tier, which I don't recommend because there's no point. Now, unless you absolutely rush through the main quest, you'll definitely have enough materials to keep at least one set of weapons fully upgraded. And as far as the normal materials, merchants actually do have some of them for sale, and they do restock eventually. Lastly, you can break down gear into more materials as well. Each gear providing different materials, and unique gear can provide the rare Adra type. I honestly don't recommend you break down stuff. I'd much rather sell it, or just hoard it like a greedy character. Because gear tends to break down into rather minimal amounts, with the exception of two-handed weapons or bows, since you do get 2 of the equivalent materials, so it's more efficient than just merely selling it. Unique weapons are also unique in that you can use the enchanting station at your campsite as to upgrade their effects. They all start with one base enchantment that you can then upgrade into another one, but only one. For example, for Minoleta's Conduit Wand, we have Charged Missile that can become Overcharged Missile for higher damage and range, or Detonating Missile for stun generation. You can only pick one upgrade, and that's it forever. You cannot change it at all. They won't cost the common upgrade materials to upgrade, but rather the other stuff you loot, especially from creatures. So they don't really compete in resources as far as changing the enchantments. Sadly, it doesn't seem like you can, well, upgrade unique armor at all or accessories, which is somewhat disappointing. You could do that in Pillars of Eternity. When it comes to gear, just as a quick tip, although I'll soon release a guide with the best early game gear anyways and where to find it, for the early game, so chapter 1, almost all of the bounties you can get will provide you with one unique gear, either a weapon or armor, which can help a lot early. It's just that some of these bounties, like the one I mentioned before, will have enemies of second tier, so be careful with that, if you don't really have any upgraded gear yet. Sadly for the second chapter of the game, the bounties there don't do much other than give you money. Anyways, now that we know all about gear upgrades and upgrade tiers, let's talk about another important campsite mechanic, the campsite totems. I have, for example, Woodika's totem here, which is one of the main goddesses of the game. Totems are amazing because they will provide you with enormous amounts of stacking, permanent passives or buffs. When I say permanent, they last forever until you trade the totem for another. For example, the Scales of the Oathbinder totem will provide a very nice stacking bonus to Resolve and Intelligence, also reduced party members' cooldowns, extra health and essence regeneration when reviving allies, and some other nice benefits. They are really good at what they provide, because like I said, it's permanent. Totems all require first a totem base, and then you have to find the multiple fragments spread all over the maps. Kinda like secret hidden away items. Thankfully, you don't need to find all fragments to activate the effects. You can do it step by step. Each fragment you'll find will provide you with the corresponding passive benefit. For the first totem, the base is right here at the Shrine to Woodika. And as far as the other pieces, well, you do have guides covering them, I'm sure. But you can also buy a map that's kinda generic, with hints as to the proper locations at Paradise in Sansa's Map Emporium, a shop. But yeah, be sure to pick them all because the benefits are really that good. Another very important part of camping is of course cooking. You can only cook at your campsite. So just in case you were wondering what could possibly be the use for all the food items you are getting throughout the whole game, well, it's cooking, including even the spoiled rotten food items. Food bonuses start as rather simple, but even these are pretty good enough because of the way regeneration works in AVOWED. For example, let's look at our essence here, which is very low. Now let's eat food that has 150 essence regeneration. Food items regenerate your stats very fast out of battle, not so fast during battle, but notice the little food icon next to my essence bar. It is still there even after I fully regain my essence, which means even if I cast another spell now, thus reducing my essence again, it will quickly regenerate and keep on regenerating until the full food effect has been fully applied. Now the really OP food bonuses, however, only come when you get the best quality of food, and the recipes are only unlocked when you max out the Ranger's Survivalist passive skill. First, it actually increases the regeneration properties and the duration of food buffs, but from the second tier onwards it actually unlocks stronger food recipes, the best one being at the last tier of course, for the ultimate food. Through this, you can cook food with absolutely busted bonuses, just like how amazing incredible food is in Deadfire. Just as an example, you have food with up to higher than even 700 regeneration that, like I said before, will not stop until the effect is fully applied. But there's all sorts of unique stuff like having +6 bonuses to all attributes while in conversations, great for making skill checks. The Mud Musketeer drink for +40% action and reload speed. As a matter of fact, if you thought guns were fast already at 10 dexterity, with Mud Musketeer, it is even better. So that even your arquebus type guns are reloading super fast. But there's other amazing, incredible food bonuses as well, like this one especially made for wizards, which reduces the essence cost and even cooldown as well. Even extra bonuses to critical hits chance, and an incredible plus 50% critical damage increase. Like I said before, it's so easy to max critical hits chance that, well, just do the math. Also, a lot of these food items are very easy to craft in abundance because of how many food stuff you find or just loot. Since NPCs don't really care if you steal from them, everything is there for the taking. Plus it does give a use to, let's say, rotten food you find. Different food bonuses also stack. For example, we can combine the best food for wizards with the best food for gunners. Thus all the little icons there above my HP bar. The only downside is that the bonuses don't last that much. It's around 7 minutes of real time or so. But still, because like I said, you can easily craft them in abundance, it can be great on Path of the Damned. For the last campsite mechanic, don't forget this is where you rest. And when it comes to overworld exploration, when you are exploring the overworld areas, you can always just teleport back to your camp. Let's just choose another camp, one that's far away, here for example. Because when you choose to actually leave the camp, you can pick the option to automatically exit to the previous location, so you kind of just teleport back and forth where you were before. Except once you leave, of course, your essence and HP will have fully regenerated. Note that this will not work, however, for dungeons and some specific areas. But for the early game, when you don't have a lot of resources, it can help a lot. It even works when inside the cities as well, which is great for inventory management, assuming you don't have enough strength to carry a lot of stuff, since you can easily send all gear you find directly into your campsite chest by pressing R. And like I said, you just teleport back and forth your location and the camp at will. When it comes to the actual skills and their best uses, I'll soon release a guide for each of the classes, starting with the wizard skill tree and the best spells. The last tip is actually about performance, just in case. If you have a NVIDIA graphics card unit, just like I do, I highly recommend you turn this reflex low latency setting off, because for me, if it's turned on, and it is by default, you will get a lot of crashes, which is very annoying. But the moment I turned it off, I wasn't getting any crashes anymore. And smooth performance. Well, alright friends, so this was it for our first Avowed guide for the best character creation mechanics and overall tips. If you found this guide useful, as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member if you can. I really appreciate your support. Next up, you'll have the best early game items, especially for Chapter 1 on Path of the Damned. Thank you for watching and see you next time.